The desert night was silent, broken only by the whistle of wind curling across the abandoned main street of the frontier town, when a single gunshot cracked through the stillness like a thunderclap, echoing off wooden storefronts and rattling the shutters, and in that instant every shadow seemed to leap to life, forcing even the rats to scurry back into hiding. John Mercer, a rugged man in his 40s with weathered skin and haunted eyes, staggered into view, his revolver drawn but trembling slightly in his grip, and he muttered under his breath, "Not tonight, not like this," as he scanned the rooftops, certain the shot was meant for him. A lantern flickered on the porch of the saloon, its weak glow illuminating the worn signs swinging in the wind, and the silence that followed was suffocating, pressing down like a storm about to break, every heartbeat louder than the last. From the shadows emerged the faint silhouette of a rider vanishing into the night, leaving Mercer standing in the dust, chest heaving, knowing the message was clear. Someone had found him, and the past he had tried to bury was coming fast. John Mercer's boots dragged through the dust as he made his way to the saloon door, the echo of the gunshot still clawing at his ears, and when he pushed inside, the wooden hinges groaned like an old coffin lid, filling the air with an unsettling weight. The saloon was nearly empty, save for a barkeep polishing a glass with nervous hands, and an old piano gathering dust in the corner, its keys yellowed and chipped from years of silence. Mercer's eyes darted to every corner, every shadow, searching for movement, before settling on a whiskey bottle behind the counter. "Pour it," Mercer said, his voice low and raw, and the barkeep's hand shook as he obeyed, the amber liquid splashing against the glass. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the door, rattling the walls, as though the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something to break loose. Mercer downed the drink in one gulp, his jaw tightening as he muttered, "They know I'm here." Mercer leaned against the bar, his reflection rippling faintly in the whiskey bottle's glass, and memories of fire and screams clawed at him, forcing him to shut his eyes and bite back the ghosts. The barkeep, voice quivering, said, "Ain't seen you in years, thought you were dead," and Mercer opened his eyes, cold and steady, replying, "Dead men don't drink." The room felt tighter with each passing second, as if the walls themselves leaned in, suffocating the air, and from the far corner, a figure stirred, the scrape of boots echoing across the hollow floor. Mercer's hand drifted near his revolver, his breath steady but shallow, and the barkeep froze, eyes wide. The stranger's face remained in the shadows, hat pulled low, and the silence pressed heavier than any gunshot. Mercer whispered, almost to himself, "The past has a way of catching up." The stranger rose slowly, his boots scraping the floor like steel dragged against stone, and with each step the lantern light revealed fragments of his face, a scar across the cheek, a smirk without warmth, and eyes that burned with recognition. "Mercer," he said, voice like gravel, "never thought I'd see you crawl back into this pit." Mercer straightened, jaw tight, and replied, "Some pits are deeper than hell." The barkeep backed away, muttering prayers under his breath, while outside the wind slammed against the shutters, rattling the saloon as if the storm itself was eavesdropping. The stranger stopped a few feet short of Mercer, his hand hovering near his gun belt, fingers twitching with intent, and the room's air grew heavier, sweat rolling down the barkeep's brow as silence stretched like a noose waiting to snap. The silence shattered when the door creaked open again and a younger figure stepped inside, no more than 20, his eyes wide with both fear and determination, his clean coat still untouched by dust. The scarred outlaw sneered, "Kid, this ain't your fight." But the young man raised his chin, fists clenched, saying, "Then make it mine." Mercer glanced at him, recognition flickering across his face, a memory of a friend long buried mirrored in the boy's features. The outlaw's smirk faded, tension thick as a coiled snake ready to strike, while the barkeep whispered, "Lord have mercy." The boy's voice shook, but did not falter as he said, "You've run long enough, Mercer. Time to stand." The words cut sharper than steel, and for the first time that night, Mercer's revolver hand steadied. The boy's presence lingered like an echo as the outlaw slipped back into the shadows, and Mercer sank into a chair, his hand dragging across his stubbled face, the weight of years pressing harder than the gun at his side. The barkeep whispered, "He's young, John, too young." But Mercer's eyes stayed fixed on the bottle in front of him, as if searching for answers in the amber glow. "He's got his own ghosts to chase," Mercer muttered, voice heavy with memory. The boy sat near the bar, his posture defiant but restless, eyes darting with the hunger of someone desperate to prove himself. Silence filled the room until Mercer said, "If you follow me, there's no turning back." The boy nodded without hesitation, and Mercer saw in him a mirror of who he once was before regret hardened his soul. Outside, the storm began to rise, thunder rolling across the plains as if nature itself warned them both of the road ahead. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky streaked in pale gold as Mercer rode out with the boy at his side, the open plains stretching before them like a graveyard of unmarked stories. The boy asked, "Where are we headed?" his voice steady but edged with nerves, and Mercer replied, "To the only man who can still teach what matters." Dust rose beneath the hooves of their horses, and every mile pulled Mercer further into memories he'd buried, visions of a mentor who once stood between him and ruin. The boy's youthful eagerness clashed against Mercer's silence, but neither broke stride as the horizon bled with sunlight. The wind carried the scent of sage and the faint rattle of distant thunder, and Mercer's grip on the reins tightened, not from fear of the journey ahead, but from the certainty that old debts would soon demand payment. They arrived by midday at a weathered cabin on the edge of a canyon, its roof sagging but smoke curling faintly from the chimney, proof the old man was still alive. Mercer dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, and muttered, "He won't like company." The boy frowned but followed, eyes scanning the dry wilderness as if expecting danger from every crack in the earth. The cabin door opened before they could knock, and there stood an elder figure, gaunt but steady, a face etched with scars and years, eyes sharp as ever. "John Mercer," the old man said, voice like stone breaking. "Didn't think I'd see your sorry hide again." Mercer lowered his gaze and replied, "Neither did I, Elias." The boy stared, realizing this was the mentor who once shaped legends whispered through every saloon from here to the border. Inside the cabin, walls lined with rifles and relics of old gunfights, Elias moved with the deliberate patience of someone who carried both wisdom and regret. He poured black coffee into tin cups, his voice flat as he said, "You came for answers, John, but you'll leave with scars." Mercer accepted the cup, staring into the steaming surface as if it might reveal the truth he feared. The boy's eyes widened at the arsenal displayed across the room, whispering, "You fought in all those battles." Elias glanced at him, eyes narrowing, before replying, "Fought, killed, and lost." The silence after his words carried more weight than gunfire, and Mercer shifted uneasily in his seat. Outside, wind scraped dry branches against the walls like claws, and the boy's eagerness faltered, replaced with a dawning understanding of the cost carried by men like Elias and Mercer. As the sun dipped low, Elias leaned forward, his voice steady but laced with something heavier than age. "The man hunting you, John, is no stranger. He was once your brother in arms, the same one you trusted with your life." Mercer froze, the boy glancing between them with wide eyes. "I buried that part of me," Mercer said, voice shaking with suppressed fury. Elias slammed his hand against the table, rattling the tin cups, and growled, "But he didn't bury you." The boy whispered, "So this fight is personal," and Mercer's silence was confirmation enough. The cabin seemed to darken with the weight of the revelation, and outside the sky burned red as though nature mirrored the blood debt that was about to be paid. The ride back from Elias's cabin carried a weight that pressed on Mercer's chest, each hoofbeat echoing like a drumbeat of fate, and though the sky was painted in brilliant streaks of orange, he could feel only the shadows creeping closer. The boy rode ahead, his eyes bright with restless conviction, but Mercer hung back, knowing such fire had burned out of him long ago. Elias's words repeated in his mind like a curse, "Your brother in arms," and the old scars flared as if fresh. When they reached the canyon pass, Mercer reined in sharply, scanning the cliffs, and muttered, "Too quiet." A moment later, gunfire erupted from above, rocks splintering as bullets rained down. The boy ducked, his horse panicking, while Mercer drew his revolver with a snarl, firing back into shadows he couldn't see. The ambush was the first strike of a war he had tried to outrun, and there would be no more hiding. Canyon echoed with gunfire, each shot bouncing like thunder, and the boy shouted, "There's too many!" His voice cracked with panic, but his hands gripped the reins with stubborn resolve. Mercer fired upward, his jaw clenched and barked, "Hold steady!" Dust choked the air as rocks crumbled, horses reared, and one outlaw tumbled down the slope with a scream. The boy's first shot went wild, shattering stone, but Mercer noticed his courage held even as fear carved lines across his face. The chaos forced them into cover beneath a jutting boulder, Mercer reloading with steady precision while the boy's hands shook. "You'll learn," Mercer growled, passing him a bullet. Lightning split the horizon as the storm rolled back, and the canyon was lit in violent flashes, the sound of battle blending with the roar of nature itself. By the time silence fell, the ground was littered with empty shells and bloodstains darkening the dirt. But the attackers had melted back into the cliffs, leaving only echoes of their laughter carried by the storm. The boy slumped against the rock, chest heaving, and whispered, "We survive." Mercer looked at him with eyes that offered no comfort, saying, "Surviving ain't winning." He scanned the canyon walls, his expression hardening as realization struck. "That was a warning," he muttered, and his grip tightened on the revolver. The boy frowned, confusion mixing with fear. Mercer added, "They want me cornered, broken before the end." The storm rumbled overhead, and in its growl, Mercer heard the voice of an old betrayal resurfacing. The ghosts of his past were no longer whispers in the dark. They were flesh, blood, and bullets. That night they found shelter in an abandoned barn on the edge of the plains, its roof half collapsed, the smell of dust and straw thick in the air. The boy lit a small fire, its glow trembling against the warped wooden beams, while Mercer sat silent, staring at nothing. "Tell me why they're after you," the boy pressed, his youthful voice sharp with frustration. Mercer's eyes remained fixed on the fire as he replied, "Because once I stood beside a man I should kill." The boy's face tightened, but he said nothing. The truth hung heavier than the smoke, and when Mercer finally looked at him, the weight of regret carved deeper lines into his weathered face. "If you stay with me, you'll end up like me," Mercer warned. The boy clenched his jaw, firelight flickering in his determined eyes. "Then, so be it." At dawn, Mercer saddled his horse with slow, deliberate movements, the silence between him and the boy speaking louder than any words. The horizon was washed in pale light, promising another day of blood. From the distance came the low toll of a church bell carried by the wind, its mournful note a reminder that even towns prayed for salvation from men like him. The boy tightened his coat and asked, "Do you ever wish it was different?" Mercer paused, his hand lingering on the saddle, before muttering, "Every damn day." They mounted, their silhouettes framed against the rising sun, and rode toward the sound of the bell. The town waiting ahead was no sanctuary, it was a trap. But Mercer knew he could not keep running. The time for reckoning had begun. By midday they reached a ravine where jagged rocks cut the sky like broken teeth, and Mercer pulled the reins sharply, forcing the horses into the cover of stone. "We stay low," he muttered, voice gravel rough. "Too many eyes out here." The boy dismounted, glancing nervously at the cliff tops, his breath shallow as the silence pressed down. In the distance, the faint sound of riders echoed, the outlaws' men sweeping the land like vultures searching for carrion. Mercer pressed his back against the stone, revolver in hand, and whispered, "They'll push us into the open if we're not careful." The boy nodded, clutching his rifle with white knuckles, his young face streaked with dust and sweat. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for violence to erupt, and Mercer knew the net was drawing tighter. They moved deeper into the ravine, every footstep deliberate, every sound magnified by the still air. The boy whispered, "How do you live like this?" And Mercer answered coldly, "You don't live, you survive." The cliffs narrowed, forcing them into a path barely wide enough for one horse, and the tension tightened with every step. A hawk circled above, its cry sharp as a warning bell, and Mercer's eyes flicked skyward before returning to the shadows. "Trust nothing out here," he said, his tone carrying years of bitter truth. The boy swallowed hard, his youthful fire dimmed by the weight of reality. The ravine walls pressed closer, dust swirling in the dry wind, and Mercer knew they were walking straight into the jaws of something worse than bullets, fear itself. As they emerged from the ravine, the land opened to a small town, sitting crookedly against the horizon, its wooden structures sagging under years of neglect. Smoke drifted from chimneys, but the air carried an uneasy silence. Mercer stopped at the edge of the main street, scanning the buildings, and muttered, "Too quiet." The boy looked around, whispering, "Where is everyone?" Doors were shut tight, curtains pulled, and the air felt thick with fear. Then the church bell tolled once, slow and deliberate, echoing across the empty street. Mercer's face hardened. "They're watching." The boy gripped his rifle tighter, sweat running down his neck, as shadows moved faintly behind window glass. The town wasn't abandoned. It was waiting, coiled like a trap ready to spring. From the saloon doors stepped a figure draped in elegance out of place with the dust-choked street, a woman with sharp eyes, her dress dark as midnight, moving with a grace that cut through silence. The boy stiffened, but Mercer's expression twisted as if facing both memory and threat. "Clara," he said, voice heavy. She tilted her head, lips curling into a faint smile, and answered, "John Mercer, running never suited you." Her tone dripped with familiarity and danger, and the boy glanced between them, confused. The windows around them creaked open slightly, rifle barrels glinting in the shadows, and Clara whispered, "You'll never leave this town unless he wills it." The weight of betrayal clung to her like perfume, and Mercer realized the snare had been set long before he arrived. The silence fractured as gunfire erupted from hidden windows, splinters flying across the street. Mercer shoved the boy behind a trough, rolling into cover as bullets tore through the dirt. Clara stood untouched in the doorway, her eyes glinting with triumph. The boy shouted, "They'll kill us all," but Mercer roared back, "Then fight!" Dust rose in choking clouds as lead tore through wood and glass, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Mercer's revolver barked back, sparks flashing in the shadows, while the boy fumbled to aim. Clara's laugh cut through the chaos, low and mocking, as if the violence were music to her ears. The trap had snapped shut, and Mercer knew the war was no longer coming. It had arrived. The gunfire finally faded, leaving the street scarred with splinters, shattered glass, and silence heavy as stone. Mercer crouched behind cover, chest heaving, when the boy tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide with something more than fear. "I found this," he said, pulling a folded letter from his coat, its edges stained with dust and blood. Mercer snatched it, unfolding the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, hard, deliberate strokes belonging to the one man he swore he'd never face again. His brother in arms. The letter spoke of betrayal, debts unpaid, and a reckoning long overdue. Mercer's mouth went dry, his vision narrowing, and he whispered, "He's alive." The boy frowned, confused, but Mercer's hands clenched around the paper. What he had buried was not gone. It had been hunting him all along. They retreated into a half-ruined stable on the edge of town, lantern light flickering against the cracked wall. Mercer read the letter aloud, every word cutting deeper. It revealed the outlaw leader was not only his former comrade, but the man who betrayed their unit, trading loyalty for power. The boy paced, fists clenched, whispering, "He's the one behind this whole damn thing." Mercer's eyes darkened as memories surged, long nights of battle fought side by side, promises of brotherhood, and the night it all burned away in treachery. "He wore the same badge I did," Mercer muttered, voice breaking, "and then he buried us all." The boy stopped pacing, looking at Mercer with awe and fear. "So this isn't just about survival, it's revenge." Mercer said nothing, but the fire in his eyes gave the answer. The saloon doors creaked open once more, and Clara stepped inside, her face lit with a strange mix of defiance and sorrow. The boy raised his rifle, but Mercer shook his head, his voice low. "She's not here to kill us." Clara's gaze lingered on Mercer, her words sharp but wavering. "He's been waiting for you, John. Everything since the fire has been leading to this." Mercer's jaw clenched. "Why warn me now?" She looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "Because once, I loved the man you were, before blood drowned him." The boy's expression hardened, suspicion in his voice as he asked, "Why should we trust you?" Clara's eyes met Mercer's, filled with regret. "Because he'll burn this town to the ground to bury you. And I don't want to watch it happen again." The boy stormed outside, anger burning hotter than fear, his voice cracking as he shouted, "How long were you going to keep lying, Mercer?" Mercer followed, stepping into the moonlit street, the letter clenched in his fist. "I never lied," he growled. "I just buried the truth." The boy's face twisted with betrayal. "You led us into a trap, chasing ghosts from your past." Mercer's chest tightened, the weight of guilt suffocating, but his voice came low and steady. "Those ghosts are flesh and blood, and they'll kill us both if we don't finish this." The silence stretched until the boy turned away, wiping sweat and tears from his face. For the first time, Mercer felt the knife edge of losing more than his own soul. He was losing the only ally he had left. The bell tolled midnight, slow and heavy, as the outlaw leader finally appeared at the far end of the street. He was older than Mercer remembered, his clean coat catching the moonlight, but his eyes burned with the same ruthless fire. "John Mercer," he called, voice carrying like a sermon. "I gave you a brother's trust, and you gave me a traitor's bullet." Mercer stepped forward, revolver at his side, his voice a growl. "You buried your own men for power. Tonight you answer for it." The boy stood frozen, torn between rage and fear, while Clara watched from the shadows, her face unreadable. The street lay empty, except for the two men, the past and present colliding under the cold gaze of the moon. The reckoning had begun. The town square was silent as Mercer walked forward, boots striking the dirt with a steady rhythm, the outlaw leader mirroring his steps at the far end of the street. The boy and Clara lingered at the edges, shadows caught between fear and loyalty, while windows creaked open above with townsfolk watching in silence. The air was electric, heavy with the weight of unspoken history, and the outlaw's voice cut through it like a blade. "You always thought yourself righteous, John, but you never had the spine to finish what you started." Mercer's eyes narrowed, revolver heavy at his side, his voice low and steady. "Maybe I was waiting for the day you came crawling back." The bell tolled once, deep and hollow, signaling the beginning of an end neither man could avoid. The boy whispered, "Don't do this," his voice trembling, but Mercer did not turn, his gaze locked on the figure ahead. The outlaw leader smirked, tilting his head, and called, "Your pupil fears you'll die like a dog." Mercer spat into the dust, his reply sharp, "Better a dog than a snake." The crowd hidden behind shutters held its breath, the silence broken only by the soft jingle of spurs and the low creak of leather belts. The boy gripped his rifle, his heart pounding as he stepped forward, but Clara caught his arm, whispering, "This is their fight." The outlaw shifted, his fingers twitching near his holster, and Mercer's breath slowed, every second stretching into eternity. The duel was moments from being carved into blood. The outlaw's hand flashed first, revolver gleaming in the moonlight, and the street erupted in a deafening crack. Mercer drew in a blur, the sound of his shot folding into the outlaw's, sparks flashing in the dark. Dust exploded from the ground between them, and the crowd gasped from the shadows. The boy cried out, rushing forward, but Clara held him back, her grip iron strong. Mercer staggered, a line of blood cutting across his arm, but his stance held firm. The outlaw leader sneered, "Slower than I remember." Mercer raised his revolver again, eyes burning with fury. "Still faster than you'll ever see coming." The next shot rang out, smoke curling, cutting the silence in half. The outlaw staggered as Mercer's bullet ripped across his side, but he steadied himself, rage twisting his face. "You should have killed me years ago," he roared, firing wildly, glass shattering around them. Mercer ducked behind a trough, his breath ragged, then rose to fire again, each shot deliberate, precise. The boy scrambled to Mercer's side, shoving fresh bullets into his hand, shouting, "Finish it!" Clara stood frozen, torn between betrayal and redemption, her eyes locked on the outlaw. The leader stumbled, clutching his wound, yet still lifted his revolver, his voice hoarse with hate. "I'll bury you with the rest." Mercer's eyes blazed as he stepped into the open. No more cover, no more fear, his revolver raised for the last time. The final shot rang out, echoing like thunder through the empty streets, and the outlaw leader collapsed to his knees, his revolver slipping from blood-stained fingers. Mercer stood over him, chest heaving, the barrel of his gun still smoking. "This is where it ends," Mercer growled, his voice shaking with both rage and sorrow. The outlaw's lips twisted into a broken smile, whispering, "You can kill me, John, but you'll never escape what we did." With that he fell, the dust swallowing his last breath. The boy exhaled in relief, but Mercer's face showed no victory, only the heavy weight of survival. Clara turned away, tears glistening though her expression remained unreadable. The town was silent again, but it was not peace, it was aftermath. Dawn crept over the battered town, painting the sky in muted pinks and grays, as the dust settled from the night's violence. Mercer stood alone in the square, revolver still heavy in his hand, its smoke finally gone. The boy approached slowly, shoulders trembling, his voice barely steady. "It's over, isn't it?" Mercer's gaze lingered on the lifeless figure in the dirt, then shifted to the boy, his face shadowed by exhaustion. "Over for him, not for us." Clara emerged from the boarding house doorway, her eyes red, her dress torn at the hem, yet her posture was still proud. She looked at Mercer without a word, her silence heavier than accusation. The townsfolk peeked cautiously from shuttered windows, whispering like ghosts. The boy's hand shook as he looked at Mercer, struggling to find words. "You could have died. Why keep fighting?" Mercer holstered his revolver, his movements slow, deliberate, like an old wound reopening. "Because someone had to stand," he said, voice thick with unspoken regret. Clara stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "And what did standing give you?" "Ashes and silence." Mercer didn't reply, only looked at her with a sorrow deeper than words. The boy clenched his jaw, forcing strength into his voice. "Then I'll carry it. I'll learn." Mercer's eyes softened for the first time, but the weight on his shoulders did not lift. The townsfolk began to emerge, timid, gathering around the broken square. Clara's voice broke the silence, softer now, fragile beneath the weight of everything lost. "We can't keep living in the past." Mercer looked at her, eyes dark and tired, but nodded faintly. "The past doesn't die easy." The boy stepped forward, standing taller than before, though his youth betrayed him. "Then let's make something worth keeping." The townsfolk gathered, hesitant but hopeful, their murmurs rising like a fragile hymn. Mercer looked at the boy, then at the townspeople, his jaw tightening. He had fought battles no one else would fight, but this was not his town to keep. Clara lowered her gaze, her expression softening, as if she finally understood the cost of his burden. The boy turned to Mercer, eyes burning with determination. Teach me to fight, to protect them like you did." Mercer's face hardened, torn between pride and fear. "Fighting's the last lesson you should ever learn," he muttered. Clara placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Maybe he doesn't need to learn to fight. Maybe he needs to learn to live." The boy looked between them, his resolve unshaken. "Then I'll learn both." Mercer sighed, the sound of a man who had carried too many ghosts. "Then I'll show you. But you'll carry it different." Around them, the townsfolk began clearing rubble, reclaiming their lives piece by piece. As the sun climbed higher, Mercer turned from the square, his steps slow, each one echoing finality. Clara called after him, her voice quiet but filled with unspoken pleas. "Where will you go?" He paused, the weight of the question heavy, then answered, "Wherever ghosts stop following." The boy tried to step after him, but Mercer raised a hand, stopping him gently. Not yet. Your road starts here. Clara's eyes glistened as she watched him walk away, the dust rising in his wake like a shroud. The townsfolk stood silent, honoring a man who had given them back more than safety. He had given them a chance to begin again. The frontier was never kind, but for the first time it felt alive with possibility.